Being a fan of the Warcraft games, I can't really say that I had this problem, but one of the biggest complaints I've heard about the Warcraft movie is that it's hard to follow all the characters and settings they're trying to introduce. Which is an understandable complaint, and I can see a lot of the things they might have neglected to mention. Which I also understand on their part, because they're trying to fit a game's length of story into a movie, and you have a lot more time in a game, which is supposed to last you as long as possible, to introduce more characters and settings. Whereas with the movie, they have to fit all those characters and all those locations into like 2 hours or so. So as sort of a moviegoer's guide to Warcraft, for people who haven't played the games, I thought I'd try to clear up some of the characters and locations featured in the movie. So I'm going to give a little bit of forewarning here. I'm gonna try my best to avoid talking about the events after the movie, since that'll undoubtedly contain spoilers for the next movies. And I'll be totally honest about the movie, there were some much better stories within the Warcraft universe that they could have told, especially the events of Warcraft 3 and beyond. So if you were even slightly interested in the Warcraft universe after watching the movie, I highly recommend you refrain from looking up the spoilers for what happens afterward. If you really want to look it up though and have like a lore primer for getting into World of Warcraft, I'll put a link in the description for a Blizzard website that shows the plots for all the Warcraft games. First, let's talk about Anduin Lothar, our main character played by Travis Fimmel. Fortunately, most of his exploits are pretty well represented so far, likely owing to the fact that he's the main character. What they don't really talk about though is why he's held in such high regard in Stormwind. Anduin Lothar was the last living descendant of Thoradin, who was the leader of the Arathi back when humans were still in tribes and not kingdoms. Thoradin led the Arathi to unite all the other human tribes, and formed the first human nation of Erethdor. He also forged the original alliance between humans and the High Elves up in the north. No empire lasts forever though, and when that empire fractured, the last surviving members of the Arathi bloodline traveled south and founded the kingdom of Stormwind. As far as Lothar himself though, he grew up in the royal court of Stormwind as friends with both Prince Lane and Medivh. While Prince Lane would of course grow up to become king of Stormwind, and Medivh would eventually become the guardian of Tirisfal, Lothar joined Stormwind's military as soon as he came of age, and quickly rose through the ranks until he was put in charge of Stormwind's military. And from that point on we come to the events of the movie, so it's time to move on to the next character, which would be Garona Half-Orcan, played by Paula Patton. Now Garona in the movie is a little different from Garona in the games. Before I can really effectively explain who she is though, I need to tell you guys about the Draenei. These are those blue goat alien looking things at the beginning of the film. This world the orcs come from is called Draenor, and despite the Draenei sharing a similar name, they actually aren't native to Draenor. And they didn't always call themselves the Draenei either. They used to be called the Eredar, and they come from a planet called Argus. Their society was a utopia where art, science, magic, and technology were all as one. And while Draenei society and architecture is impressive, it's a shadow of what life was like on Argus. The Eredar were led by 3 powerful mages, Kil'jaeden, Archimonde, and Velen. As you can probably tell from the appearance of the first 2, they got into some pretty shady shit. Now rewinding even more, it's time to talk about the demons. There's only really a brief mention of demons in the movie, but they play a much bigger role in the Warcraft universe than that lets on. Now since the beginning of time in the Warcraft universe, there's been a species, I guess you could call it, called the Titans. The Titans sought to bring order to the chaos of existence. Most life on Azeroth today is originated from the Titans. Among their leadership, known as the Pantheon, there was one called Sargeras. Placed in charge of the Pantheon's armies, he was responsible for keeping the chaos and the demons at bay. But countless millennia of war against the demons took its toll on Sargeras. I don't want to get too much into the story of Sargeras, but to summarize, the countless horrors and atrocities he had to witness battling the demons drove him to total madness, to the point where he believed the Titans were responsible for all the problems in the universe. So he released all the imprisoned demons he'd captured over the millennia, and swore to undo all the Titans' work, founding the Burning Legion. In his spree of shattering countless worlds, he eventually set his sights on Argus. Recognizing the value of the Eredar's power, he offered them the chance to join him, promising them great power in return. Velen, however, had a vision of what would happen if he accepted the Burning Legion's power. He saw visions of the Eredar becoming twisted abominations. He tried to warn the others not to accept their offer, but they mostly just ignored him. In his desperate search for help, he was contacted by the Naaru, pure embodiments of the divine light. With their help, he and his followers fled Argus, calling themselves now the Draenei, which in their language means the exiled ones. The majority of Eredar, most of whom sided with the Burning Legion, felt like this was a betrayal and tracked them down. The Draenei led them on a chase spanning multiple planets, with the Burning Legion twisting and converting all life in their path. Eventually, the Draenei colonized a planet that was safe. They called this planet Draenor, or Exile's Refuge in their language. They even lived peacefully with the, at the time, shamanistic orc tribes. The peace wouldn't last forever though, as the Burning Legion eventually tracked them down. Seeking revenge, the Burning Legion twisted the orcs against the Draenei. Finding a loyal servant in Gul'dan, the Legion had him trick the orcs into drinking demon's blood, promising them power and conquest. The blood did grant them power, but it also made them servants of the Burning Legion. Drinking the blood also permanently stains their skin green, which is why you see most of the orcs in the movie with green skin, whereas only a few have brown skin. The Legion used these fell orcs to wipe out or enslave the remaining Draenei, which is where we see them in the movie, so at last it's time to finally start talking about Garona. Garona is the result of Gul'dan breeding one of his orc warriors with a Draenei. Although in the games her father was definitely the orc while the mother was the Draenei, in the movies she implies herself that her mother was an orc, saying that she was given her tusk to wear as a necklace to remember her by. Now in the games, Garona was placed under a mind control spell by Gul'dan, but in the movies, Gul'dan doesn't really seem to have much of an influence on her. For example, video game Garona, she was ordered by the Shadow Council and Gul'dan to assassinate King Lane. Movie Garona, King Lane told her to assassinate him so that she could gain the trust of the orcs. So in the games, this meant Garona was kind of a wild card in terms of whose side she was on, whereas in the movies they're trying to show that she's a good guy right from the start. We'll just have to wait and see how this affects the story moving forward. She was raised in the barracks with her orcish side of the family, but was never accepted and was always considered ugly and deformed by the rest of the orcs, which would come to reflect how she felt about herself. It also might be important to mention that she has a Draenei uncle who's searching for her, despite the fact that she's half orc. It's questionable whether or not he's going to show up in the movies though, since in the games he doesn't really show up until World of Warcraft. But keep your eyes and ears open for a mention of a guy named Murad. So then, during Gul'dan's rise to power, she became his personal interpreter, spy, and assassin. But she refused to swear allegiance to any of the orc clans, so as a result they all despised her. Gul'dan would end up using this to his advantage to train her, arranging spectacles intended to kill her so that she was forced to adapt and survive, until eventually she was honed into the character we see in the movie. Quick little bonus fact, in the fight where Khadgar and Lothar go up against Medivh, Garona was actually supposed to be part of that fight as well, during which Medivh would assault her with visions of doubt, which left her vulnerable to manipulations from the Shadow Council, which caused her to assassinate King Lane. However, because of the retcon regarding the reason for King Lane's death, this didn't make it into the movie. Next on our list is one of the most poorly explained characters in the movie, Medivh. Now, like with Garona, we're gonna have to go back in time and talk about the High Elves before we can talk about Medivh. These are the elves with the glowing blue eyes and the fancy clothes that you see for brief moments in the movie. Now, I mentioned how the Burning Legion was behind the orc invasion of Azeroth, but this isn't the first time the Legion's taken an interest in the world. Now, long ago, even before the events of the movie, Azeroth was a single Pangea-like continent, inhabited mostly by trolls and a race called Night Elves, both of which are still around today. Now, there was a huge gap between upper and lower classes in Night Elf culture. You could even say that it wasn't even a single culture. You had the culture of the lower class, which was a druidic culture, and the Highborn culture, which mostly studied arcane magic. The Highborn's magic was fueled by the Well of Eternity, a massive font of magical power located at the center of the known world. Now again, I'm not going to get too much into what happened since I'm trying to get to Medivh, so quick cliff notes: the Highborn, in their hubris and their search for power, attempted to summon the Burning Legion. This is what you would call, putting it lightly, a bad move. Drawing power from the Well of Eternity for the summoning ritual, the well became corrupted with demonic energy. The lowborn caste of Night Elves, admittedly with the help of a few gods, managed to push the vast majority of the Legion back through the portal. But the now chaotic energies of the well started to tear itself apart, which sunk over half the world into the Great Sea, leaving behind a gigantic, unrelenting maelstrom where the well once was. The Highborn who survived were banished and eventually found their home in northern Lordaeron. Over the years, their vastly different culture and lifestyle turned them into a different race entirely. Now known as High Elves, they formed the Council of Silvermoon. The Council of Silvermoon served not only as the ruling body for the High Elves, but in their guilt for causing the Well of Eternity incident, they also vowed to stop the Burning Legion wherever they might show up on Azeroth. As the other races of Azeroth, such as the dwarves, gnomes, and humans, started to develop their own cultures, the High Elves, along with all these new races, devised the Council of Tirisfal, which consisted of members of each race. The Council's charge was to select and train a Guardian, becoming known as the Guardian of Tirisfal. The Guardian's job was to search for and thwart any signs of the Burning Legion, much like the Council of Silvermoon once did. The first Guardian to be appointed was Elodie, who was only mentioned very briefly in the movie, so it's hard to tell if this is accurate, but it seems like they completely erased Elodie from history and put his name on Aegwynn. Yes, Elodie was supposed to be a dude. But Aegwynn was mother to Medivh and was the previous Guardian before him. In a time where the role of Guardian had kind of been washed down to just the puppet of the Council, Aegwynn broke the mold and returned the Guardian to their original role, and would go on to be remembered as one of the most powerful sorcerers of all time. At some point during her over 500-year reign, which was extended artificially by magic, she had to confront an avatar of Sargeras himself. Though she was able to defeat his avatar, Sargeras latched a part of himself into her soul. So when Medivh was born, this part of Sargeras passed on to him, but it didn't manifest until he became older and became the Guardian. Now with the biggest obstacle to his invasion, the Guardian, under his control, he used him to let the Fel Orcs into Azeroth, paving the way for his invasion. Though it wasn't shown in the movie, Sargeras used Medivh to eliminate the Order of Tirisfal, ensuring that no other Guardians would be chosen. As Medivh was nearing his death, Gul'dan attempted to enter his mind to pry the location of a powerful artifact of Sargeras from him, an artifact that Medivh promised him when he convinced him to bring his orcs into Azeroth. Medivh's death, combined with the banishing of Sargeras' spirit, put a curse on the area surrounding Karazhan, as well as the tower itself. The land surrounding Karazhan would come to be known as Deadwind Pass. Moving on to the next character, or are we? In the movies, King Llane is actually really well represented. He was a bit more of a close friend to Garona than the movie lets on, but apart from that, there's next to nothing about King Llane that's left out from the games. In fact, now that I think about it, pretty much every other character in the movie doesn't require too much additional explanation for this video. Starting with Durotan, he actually had a bigger role in the movies than he did in the games. Before the orcs even went through the Dark Portal, Durotan was in disagreement with Gul'dan. His constant butting of heads with Gul'dan's puppet war chief Blackhand led him and his Frostwolves to be exiled as soon as they went through the portal. So for this video I'm going to be referring to this map. It's not quite the same as the map of Azeroth seen in the movie, but I can't find a picture of that one, so this will have to do. For quick reference, the movie takes place in this area, where you can see Stormwind up in the top left and the Dark Portal at the bottom right. Moving up here, you'll find the home of the dwarves, Ironforge. And then moving up just a little bit more, you'll come to the human kingdom of Lordaeron and the elven kingdom of Quel'Thalas. Durotan led his Frostwolves right about here, a small snowy mountain area known as Alterac, where they pretty much sat out the entire First War, which was portrayed in the movie. But despite this, events pretty much unfolded just like they did in the games anyways, so I guess their change to Durotan isn't that consequential to the overall story. Durotan's wife Draka is a similar case to Durotan himself. In the game's lore, she accompanied Durotan up to Alterac, and like with Durotan, this small change to her story doesn't really seem to have affected the overall plot of the movie. Gul'dan, on the other hand, is a character who has a lot of history with a lot of different characters in the Warcraft universe that's not mentioned in the movies, but in this case I've already talked about it in this video, so we can go ahead and fade this guy out. And so our next rapid fire topic is Khadgar. Most of Khadgar's accomplishments happen much later in the story, but as far as his involvement in the First War, the movie pretty much covers everything you need to know. One thing I do feel like is worth mentioning though, while it was mentioned in the movie, it wasn't really emphasized very much. But before Khadgar ran away from his training, he wasn't just a student of the Kirin Tor. He was training to succeed Medivh himself, training to become a Guardian. And this is why Medivh got so angry when he found Khadgar in his tower.
Get some ideas what you're going to do with the place once it's yours?
Guardian, I renounced my vow.
Our next guy's story is very similar in the movies to what it was in the games, but the movies didn't really talk much about the hammer he wielded, which is a family heirloom that's been passed down for generations, known as the Doomhammer, the namesake of his family, which will continue to be passed down throughout Warcraft's story. Another small thing they changed in the movie is that Orgrim was not a Frostwolf like Durotan. He was actually part of the Blackrock clan, which was led by Blackhand. Since their two clans never really agreed with each other, they formed sort of a forbidden bromance between each other growing up, but that's really not entirely relevant since it doesn't really affect the story as a whole. Our next rapid fire character, Blackhand, is mostly the same in the movies as he was in the game, the only difference being the loss of his hand. In the games, Blackhand had both of his hands intact until the day he died. It's only the recent incarnations of Blackhand that show him having any problems with his hand. Now, Morose doesn't really have any particular interesting story I want to talk about. I just thought it was amusing how they made him a somewhat relevant character in the movies, since he was such a minor character in the games. King Magni's another character that there's really not much to talk about. Not yet anyways. He didn't really participate in the First War, as you can see near the beginning of the movie with him refusing to lend support to Stormwind. Now they did end up making him a close friend to Anduin and Lothar, but as you've probably heard me say a lot already, it really doesn't make too much of a difference in the overall story since he didn't participate in the war at all. And lastly, these three characters? All brand new to the story, so you know about as much as I do. But just a quick refresher, subordinate to Anduin, Queen of Stormwind, and son of Anduin Lothar. Now the very last thing I want to talk about is Dalaran. They mention the city a few times and they go there once, and in the movie it's shown as being a flying city. Which, I mean, they're not wrong. In World of Warcraft it is a flying city. But during the First War and for many years to come, Dalaran was very much grounded. The city only started to fly during the middle of World of Warcraft. Now, yeah, if you haven't played the games, you probably don't understand why I'm taking so much issue with this, but basically, part of Warcraft 3's story involves Dalaran being on the ground. Now, I can't really explain why that is without entering spoiler territory, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see how they work that in. Hey guys, first of all, I want to say thanks for watching. Second of all, I wanted to just mention that I had considered doing a lore primer for people who are going into World of Warcraft after watching the movie and not having played any of the games. And I also thought about doing a review, but both of these I ended up deciding against making. If either of these are something you guys would like to see me make, let me know in the comments below.